On this episode, we are talking about 1995's Desperado. We're going to be talking about the mental health burden of vengeance, behind-the-scenes trivia, and much more. I'm Captain Nostalgia, and this is the Victims and Villains Podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that educates and engages individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. Grab your guitar case, because the show starts right now, and it's loaded with spoilers. We thought for the month of March we might as well keep this unnatural trend that we've found ourselves in just continuing. If you're wondering, what is this guy talking about? Let me direct you to episode 355, where we talked about Shark Boy and Lava Girl, We Can Be Heroes, which also happens to star our guest. The Mandalorian, episode 356, episode 357, From Dusk Till Dawn, and episode 360, The Faculty. What do all of these things have in common? They were all directed by the great Robert Rodriguez, and we are here to talk about Desperado. As I hinted at, our guest for this episode starred in the Netflix original movie We Can Be Heroes. I am Captain Nostalgia, by the way. And brently-heilbron, what's going on this morning for you, friend?
Hey, bright and early. Here to talk about Roro in the morning. It's like a morning drive show. I'm into it.
And Mr. Dan, the movie man, Rockwood.
Hey, yeah, this adventure we're on, I mean this in the best way possible. I had a friend who in college offered one of my other friends to stay on his couch for like a week. They ended up living together for 2 years, and that's how it feels with the Robert Rodriguez films at this point. I didn't know what I was signing up for when I agreed to do the first one, but I am so happy that I'm here, and I'm ready to keep this train rolling.
I think I can speak for maybe Dan. But Dan, if you want to, we can just cover the entire Mariachi trilogy. I'd be okay with that at this point.
I'm so not... This is my first time seeing Desperado. I didn't realize up front that it was part of a trilogy. And so by the end of the movie, I was like, wait, did I miss something? What's happening here? And then my fiance was looking into it, and she's like, wait, hey, hold on. There's a movie that predates this, and then there's a sequel. I was like, all right, well, we're going to have to go and get the full story. But at least I know the middle part now, so that's good. It's kind of like starting with Empire Strikes Back. So, you know... I don't know. Maybe the rest will make sense when I dive deeper into the rest of the trilogy.
So, Brentley, have you seen this movie before? Because this was a first time for Dan and I.
Oh, yeah. I saw Desperado when I was either a senior in high school or a freshman in college. It came out in 95, and I saw it in Austin, Texas. And it was, at the time, just the coolest thing I'd ever seen, even cooler than the Lost Boys. And that was the height of cool, in my opinion, at the time. Desperado was such a good action movie, so funny. And that's what really struck with me, and how good of a comedy director Robert Rodriguez was in some of these sequences, in that action movies are just timing, and so is comedy. And then in terms of your point, I don't think I had seen El Mariachi at the time. So this was a complete standalone thing when I saw it. And then later, having worked with Rodriguez and seeing some of these props and learning about El Mariachi, it helped fit the story in more, and kind of learning some behind-the-scenes stuff. But, oh, yeah, I loved it when I saw it. Still do.
So there are some slight differences between El Mariachi and Desperado. For one, the language is a huge thing. El Mariachi is actually in Spanish. Which makes me want to seek it out all the more. And then the lead that we meet in that movie is also a different person. It's kind of like a Rhodey situation from the MCU, where you look at the first Iron Man and it's Terrence Howard, and then the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's a
Rhodey situation.
Yeah. There's
Don Cheadle. There's a multiverse where Carlos Gallardo plays Antonio Banderas somewhere. I had heard a funny story around that recasting at the time. I went to college with Robert's brother, Marcel. This was years ago at UT. Nice. And the story at the time was that when they recast El Mariachi, you know, for a big Hollywood lead, Antonio Banderas, which was kind of groundbreaking at the time to have kind of a full Latin leading cast. But that Carlos Gallardo's character, who plays one of the guys in the band, gets shot in the movie, but he didn't want to die, and so they shot a bunch of scenes with him, you know, living and doing all this cool stuff, and ultimately got him in the movie. So Carlos Gallardo makes a cameo, El Mariachi, and is a very cool guy to work with. We did Red 11 together.
Nice. I Red 11. We talked about it in your like in-depth interview about your career, and that's still a movie that like I'm like wanting to see. I don't know if I don't know if it came out or if I just haven't like seen it. It hasn't come across my radar yet.
It hasn't come out yet. We shot that years ago, 2018, 2019. It hasn't come out yet. It was a fun little return to low budget form. Yes. And but the fun thing is that he would play El Mariachi on the set, and he would time out our scenes to it. He would say like, okay, this scene is 15 minutes long, the sequence. We need to have our thing done by the time this El Mariachi does this. So we would use El Mariachi to time our own stuff. And awesome. We got to hear all sorts of cool stuff. But the one thing about Desperado is that all those props, like the guitar case and things like that, they're all over the place in Rodriguez's studio.
Yeah.
And that there was some character elements of Red 11 that included a guy that collected a bunch of movie props. So we got to kind of play with all those props, and to see, you know, the Banderas guitar case was super cool. Come on, I'm still such a fan.
Man, the props in this movie alone are just so good. I think one of my favorite scenes in this movie is like as salema-hayek is like patching him up, and she's like going through the case, and the first thing she picks up is the cock gun. Where it's like, you know, you strap it on and then it's like, oh, the thing's saved my life more than once. And then the finale of this, where you have his like two friends with the like guitar case, it's like you have a rocket launcher in one guitar case, and two guys are basically machine guns. I was like, man, this is freaking genius.
It's beautiful, and it was just so cool, you know, to have the Gatling gun come out of a guitar case. I was just kind of reading about it that Desperado originally had an NC-17 rating, really probably due to the spectacular, beautiful violence. And they took the sort of codpiece gun element, they cut a lot of it out of it, and they used it, though later Tom Savini had it in From Dusk Till Dawn. So never let a bad idea go to waste, kids. If you need your underwear to fire a bullet, make sure it kills vampires at least. So a lot of it they cut out, and still just so beautiful. Love it.
Yeah, I was that the whole ending scene. I mean, we can get to that in a little while, but that it, as great and intense as it was for a climax of the film, it felt like it was cut short. And yeah, come to find that there was an entire sequence that was shot and ended up needing to be cutting down for the rating, which is just so disappointing. And I'm so curious if this movie was made today, would they face that same restrictions? Because I feel like we as audiences have just been sensitized to a certain point of levels of gore and violence in films. And I think the John Wick movies especially are a good example of this, of there's a certain appetite for that kind of carnage now that is deemed acceptable, that maybe wasn't back then.
I think so. I mean, I can't remember the last time a movie got an NC-17 rating, if that even exists anymore. It was sort of the like nice cousin to the X rating, you know. And I remember in the 90s when they started using that rating, and it was sort of a death knell. You couldn't get wide release, so it affected your release, your distribution, things like that. I would love to see some of the stuff that hit the cutting room floor from Desperado.
I'm curious if any of that stuff actually made it on its like way to like the Blu-ray, but we're also living in a age now where it seems like the director's cut, or like the Rodriguez cut, as this one would be called, like it's more accessible now, or you have a higher chance of like actually seeing it. I didn't actually know anything about that climactic scene. But man, it kind of really saddens me because that's such a good sequence, and would have loved to see like how you intensified and made that sequence all the greater.
Totally. It works though on its own. I mean, as kind of a standalone movie, which I think the majority of audiences probably at that point hadn't seen El Mariachi. I mean, it was such a cult hit at Sundance. It really propelled Rodriguez's career, and this was kind of a risk to take the spirit of El Mariachi and really, for lack of a better word, Hollywoodize it to make a big budget thing out of it. It just works so well. And that's what impresses me about Rodriguez is that he's able to transition from micro budget indie movie to big budget, effects laden, big crew movie. And it just works so well. So good.
I love this story of just like a lone man walking around Mexico with a guitar case full of guns. Like there's something that's just so simple about that works so well. And of course, when you have someone like Antonio Banderas coming in, and this opening scene with Steve Buscemi in the bar, I must have seen this at some point because I was having like deja vu while watching the scene. I'm like, the words he's saying, like the biggest Mexican I've ever seen walks into the bar. I'm like, I know I've seen this somewhere, or maybe it's been parodied in some way. But I feel like there are just moments from this movie that just transcend pop culture that even without seeing it, you'll recognize it. Another big scene later when Antonio Banderas and Salema-Hayek are walking away from the explosion and they're not looking at it. Like I've seen that clip so many other times non-related, so I was like, oh, that's what this is from. That's awesome. But man, Steve Buscemi, what a fabulous actor and a fabulous guy. And so he being in this film, one, was surprising for me, but I was so happy to see him, and he really just sets the tone so well in that opening scene and scaring the crap out of the entire bar with his story.
And I remember when Steve Buscemi comes on the screen, in my mind, that was the guy from Reservoir Dogs. And, I was so excited to see him. In terms of the walking away from the explosion, Rodriguez told us a story that when he screened it for James Cameron, that was the part that James Cameron just throws his arms up and was beyond thrilled. And then he kind of upped the ante a little bit with the walking away from the explosion and still having a conversation in From Dusk Till Dawn. So it was just so cool. It was sort of so effortlessly cool in the midst of really high stakes action. And I had seen plenty of action movies in the 80s and stuff, and just nothing was this funny. And I remember so well that there's the shootout scene in the bar and El Mariachi and the guy he's fighting, they kind of count to three, go after each other, and both their guns are empty. Quickly grab another gun. Both their guns are empty. The clips are empty. It's just so funny. I mean, that's just pure comedy. It's effortless timing. And I don't think Rodriguez gets enough credit for being such a swift comedic director and having that sense of timing. And I really think I told him this once, that this was the olden times, and he could really have been one of the great silent film directors, just in terms of understanding the mechanics and comedy. And so
I think what makes Desperado so great in that regards is the way that it's able to blend so many different genres together, the way it feels like an action movie, but then you have those like shootout scenes, especially where he's like on the roof and they're like, later we get the infamous like walking away from the explosion. It feels kind of like a Western in some aspects as well. But then at the core of it, it's like this like revenge movie that like also has this, just happens to have these really great comedic elements into it. And that was kind of something that I really wasn't expecting. I really enjoyed the moments between like Banderas and Buscemi. I thought they were like really, really great. But I really think more than anything else, I just love the fact of just some of the unexpected comedic moments. Quentin Tarantino, we haven't talked about him yet, but Quentin Tarantino's cameo in this about the guy and betting just was probably the most memorable scene of like comedy-wise in this film for me. I didn't know if you guys had like a specific moment, but I really enjoyed that story and just how like Cheech Marin has been kind of like responding to it while he's telling this joke.
Yeah, and that's another thing to be, not only is Tarantino in that scene coming off of kind of Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, but there's Cheech Marin. I mean, there's Cheech, and that was so stunning. I hadn't seen Cheech. He did some solo stuff, but he has used Cheech Marin so effectively in that movie, playing, just kind of a small little role, but just killing it. So funny. The bartender never gets it. It's beautiful. So it was, I can't imagine how much fun that must have been to have Tarantino and Cheech on set and what that scene must have been like to shoot. I was reading that some of that got on the cutting room floor as well, which is a pretty violent scene. I remember this just being so startled by some of the violence and, someone getting shot in the head and the blood sprays all over their face. It was just so beautifully executed and so funny. Again, another great cameo. It's funny because my brain remembers the Tarantino cameo, and I always kind of forget about Steve Buscemi in the beginning until I rewatch it and go, oh yeah, there's the Steve Buscemi part. Because it kind of gets eclipsed by, Tarantino's larger-than-life presence.
I can definitely see that, and for me, and just watching From Dusk Till Dawn recently, when Tarantino came on screen, I was like, oh, okay, this guy's going to be like a big part of the movie going forward, and then his part is kind of short-lived, but just a testament to his acting and the writing of the scene, because he's monologuing and he's telling the story, and I'm so engrossed with it, and it took me several minutes to be like, wow, I just sat perfectly attentive listening to a guy tell a story about pissing all over a bar. Like, that's impressive writing and impressive acting to like hold. And like every moment I'm like, yeah, oh, but did he get it in the jar? What's he gonna do next? And then he's like, oh, he's just spraying it everywhere all over the bartender. I'm like, oh no, like bartender's gonna be pissed, but then he's laughing. And then I love the punchline of the end of that joke too, and it's just it's great and so clever. Almost makes me want to try that, except I will never try that because I don't think it would work out as well in real life.
There's nothing that would happen in Desperado that could happen to me that I would react as cool. I mean, if a building exploded behind me, I'm all limbs. I mean, I would be screaming. I don't think I'd walk away as cool, be able to make out with salema-hayek. I don't think I'd be able to perform. I think that I would be in such a post-traumatic state and curled up in a ball. Maybe salema-hayek would comfort me, but, that's why I'm the Jewish Danny Trejo. And
I mean, I'm pretty sure Salma Hayek walking into the room would be enough to just render me catatonic and not know what to say or what to do.
Oh, she's so cool. She's the best. And Danny Trejo in that movie, that's the first time I ever saw him. And he didn't even have many lines in that movie, but his look became so iconic. And they made his character like a brief cameo character on King of the Hill, the animated series that was kind of based in Texas, named Octavio, was based on the complete look of Danny Trejo. And then Danny Trejo plays another part. So it really catapulted Danny Trejo he was just so instantly recognizable. He didn't have to say anything.
Yeah, the moment he came on screen, my fiance was like, wow, this is like the iconic, stereotypical Danny Trejo that you always see like referenced. Because I feel like nowadays he's such, not only is he a good actor, he seems like a genuinely good guy, and like he's been played himself in a lot of things, I feel like, and particularly in like Muppets Most Wanted, he's one of the prisoners in the gulag that Kermit is imprisoned at, and it's so funny. And so to see him just unironically play that like tough, like really scary badass guy, it's like, oh man, that's one, that's really cool, and two, it's just what a career Danny Trejo has had, and it's really awesome to see kind of where that came from and what he kind of got started with.
Muppets Most Wanted also had an NC-17 rating. It was extremely violent. It was the shootout with Scooter, Bunsen Honeydew, and Danny Trejo that got cut out. Ultra violent.
All the stuff, a lot of the gang violence in the gulag they had to cut. It was brutal. It was this actually reminds me of a funny thing when I didn't necessarily know what a gulag was before that movie came out. And so I went to see it and I was like, oh, okay. And then I was talking to someone who was writing like a research paper about the history of Russian gulags. And I was like, wait, that word's familiar. Why do I know that? Oh, Muppets Most Wanted. That's where Kermit was imprisoned. So I know it from that perspective. He's like, yeah, they're a lot worse than the movie shows.
Really? They're worse than a Muppets Most Wanted version of a Russian prison? I learned most of my history from puppets, so I think I just take it at face value. It's
good. Okay, I watched Muppet Treasure Island once, and I was ready to sail the world. So that's, I get most of my motivations from those films.
Rodriguez hasn't done a puppet movie. You know, he's one of those guys that's so fascinating because I remember he was talking about when he was doing Spy Kids, and there was a gaming element to Spy Kids in a computer game or something like the video game, and he learned how to code. He learned how to make video games because he wanted to learn. He's like a one-man show. He's got a big crew around him now, but he kind of had to learn because he didn't have people around him he didn't have the budget for it and had to kind of do it all himself. And he also said that when he was doing El-Mariachi, one of the reasons he did a lot of it by himself, he was too embarrassed. He didn't want to look bad in front of other people because he didn't know what he was doing. And so I would love to see some sort of puppet movie from Rodriguez. I'm putting it out there in the universe right now.
He just needs to come in and do a Fragile Rock movie biopic.
That's it. Yes. Rodriguez needs to direct the emo puppet band Fragile Rock. He's funny because he's in Red 11. My character's name is Doc Sock. This guy works at this pharmaceutical testing, and he named that after Fragile Rock. So it's a little homage to the emo puppet band, but in Red 11. The mysterious Red 11. We'll see if it ever sees the light of day.
Fingers crossed it does. I want to go back to the Danny Trejo sequence. He's such a you talk about memorable characters, and I think probably one of the most memorable sequences in this movie is kind of like the knife fight that he eventually ends up like having. Like he just owns that fight. And, eventually he sees his demise, but I think it's one of the most memorable things, and it kind of almost feels, I don't know if you guys felt like this, but like watching it first time, it kind of almost felt like satirical, the way that they kind of had him die, where it feels kind of like what Westerns ended up being with like, by the time that they had kind of like overstayed their welcome almost. That's kind of like how his death felt to me.
It's interesting that character at the time, it was almost instantly iconic, in the way that kind of the henchman like Jaws was in those James Bond movies, right? Where it's just like henchman with the steel teeth. Just the look of Danny Trejo, he held his own in terms of, so you almost, you didn't want to see him die because you wanted to see him live and kick ass and intimidate or do whatever he did. Overstayed his welcome. I would never tell Danny Trejo that to his face, man.
Oh, no. I'm saying like when you look at the history of film and you're talking about like how much of a mainstay like the Western genre was in like the 30s and the 40s, but by the time you get to the 60s and the 70s, like you're still making them. They just kind of feel like oversaturated by that point. And I'm kind of saying like by that point, like the deaths in those films in particular, like that's kind of how Trejo's death feels. Feels like some of the later Westerns that kind of had become like satires and like parodies of the genre that once ruled the world.
Yeah, and that's it's an interesting thing. That's the kind of danger of putting comedy in your movies as an element. Unfortunately, with comedy, a lot of the times people tend to take things less serious as a piece of work or a film, and he was just so unabashed in using comedy, and it still was the coolest action movie you'd ever seen. It still was a great Western. So comedy doesn't detract from it. It only adds to the flavor. But you're totally right. I think that you can really see the sort of line from those Westerns that he must have seen, right? All those Peck and Paws or, spaghetti Westerns or things like that. Certainly Once Upon a Time in the West and things like that. It's just a direct line. But kind of a fresh approach. So I was looking at the Wikipedia entry right before this, and it calls it a neo-Western, which is sort of the word to describe it when you don't know what to call it. I heard neo-noir a lot, neo-western, But you're right. It's certainly not in the traditional Western genre, right? I don't think that I would put it in that classification, but that's kind of the cool thing about it. It's kind of a classification in and of itself. It just becomes a Rodriguez movie. And kind of knowing which is a genre in and of itself.
I feel like watching this movie, it made me want to seek out more films set in Mexico, because there's so much for a country that is right next to the U.S., and I've only been there once briefly, but I feel like there's so much culture there that is either not known or not understood by myself and by, I'm sure, many other people in this country, that it would be nice to see that better represented on screen in showing some of the more authentic, like, towns and villages and just lifestyles of what you would see there. And in this movie being as, over the top action, like borderline farcical at times, I'm not saying that it's, this is Mexico and there's people with guitar cases just walking around with guns everywhere. But it was nice kind of seeing that representation in this movie and seeing, those stories be told, and especially having Mexican actors come on and really, kind of give that voice and tone to that movie.
Oh, yeah. If you compare that to, like, Touch of Evil, or some sort of noir movie set in Mexico where Charlton Heston is literally in brownface playing, like, a Mexican. And, No Bad at Night. It was 1956 or whatever it was, the Orson Welles movie. Which is a great movie. Really cool sequences and, cool movie. But, yeah, I think that we have – and this is great that we've now become desensitized to how groundbreaking that must have been to cast – Latinx actors in your biggest casting, right? Female lead, male lead, protagonist, antagonist, henchman, with the exception of kind of Tarantino and Buscemi, who are also just kind of in classes by themselves. That's awesome. And we don't think about that, and that's good. We shouldn't have to think about it. But at the time, I'm going to guess there was a lot of behind the scenes, work to make that happen. And he was so unflinching in his kind of vision to make that happen and to have that kind of representation on stage, on the camera. I think it's awesome. Well, I love that as part of the trilogy.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. I think it also goes to the groundbreaking nature of, taking something small like el-mariachi and proving that you have the talent to make a cohesive and compelling film with Mexican actors and in a Spanish language that, really kind of like set him ablaze and really helped him make Desperado, make From Dusk Till Dawn, The Faculty, so on and so forth. And I think one of the things that we've seen here recently is you look at a movie like Adam Wingard is a great example of a director who, started off small. He did You're Next, and You're Next was this like super small horror film that caught on a lot of buzz. And, 7 years later, 8 years now, he's getting ready to unveil the juggernaut of Godzilla versus Kong, and just signed on to do a Face-Off sequel. And so, he is, he's a really great example of that, just off the top of my head. But at the same time, like, if you can prove it that you can make it in the indie world, you have a greater chance of kind of being accepted in the larger grand scale of film. And I think I really want to see El Mariachi, but I think that, what you're talking about with how big of a hit it was at Sundance, it really makes it possible for that diversity to really gain weight and really see it on this like scale of doing El Mariachi, Desperado, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, which was the sequel to this, and then he's always kind of had that representation in some form or another in his movies, and that's something that I didn't really pick up on until we started to kind of like finding ourselves doing a lot of Rodriguez movies, and now being exposed to so much of him, he's just he really brings the proper representation that you need.
Yeah, and look at a director like Taika Waititi, who's just did little hilarious, funny, beautiful, touching little indie movies in New Zealand, and has now made the transition to direct the Thor movies and Star Wars and all this stuff, but is bringing Maori representation as well in these sort of big budget movies. It's the like seamless transition from tiny micro budget movie to big, the learning curve, to go from tiny movie, you can't fault someone if they stumble making a giant movie, just to get used to how that works and a giant crew and delegating and all that stuff. But man, it's like Luka Doncic in a rookie career. You just go right from being a rookie to a superstar. I'm a Mavericks fan, but like the same thing is with El Mariachi to Desperado. I mean, but he really could have. I've never count Rodriguez out, but objectively, you would go, it's good luck going to your big budget movie. But it was just such a seamless transition. And then also to choose to kind of not remake your movie, which he did in a little way because he reshot some scenes of Mariachi and made them as flashbacks in Desperado. And that's the story that you still want to tell to more people. Now you have a bigger chance to tell your story to more people. It's just the commitment to your own vision is so impressive, and flawless execution in so many ways. It's just one of the many impressive things about Mr. Rodriguez.
And he's uncompromising in that too. And that's one of the things that I really respect about him, is that he knows the vision that he wants to do. He understands the story and mechanics of how he sees it visually, and he's attempted and he's done so many different things. You look at it, this is a guy that his filmography includes stuff like Desperado and El Mariachi, but it also has Spy Kids and Shark Boy and Lava Girl, and then like pop music videos like sprinkled in there with some the Grindhouse movies that him and Tarantino did in the mid 2000s, and there's so many different things, and I think that this really is this is early Rodriguez, and it really captures what he's able to convey, like as far as like a storyteller, and make a compelling narrative. And here you have two characters that we find out in the final act are brothers, but they're also kind of like myths in this movie, in the sense to where you have like El Mariachi, like he's a myth, because no one's ever lived to see the guy with the gun guitar case. And then you have Bucho, who is like equally also this like powerful, just like drug kingpin in this small Mexican town. But you also, again, it's like those stories, like in the same exact way. And I loved that duality that he's able to bring to those characters, and then to kind of have that twist with all the brothers.
Yeah, I had actually forgotten that aspect of the movie, that they were brothers. And I think that he had a lot of fondness. The guy that played Moco in el-mariachi, and they sort of upped his character and kind of created a Bucho character, was a friend of Rodriguez, and a guy who he was stuck with when he was doing his pharmaceutical lab rat study. And he was like, okay, you're going to play this, evil villain in this Spanish movie. He's like, I don't speak any Spanish. Like some white guy. And he's like, don't worry. I'm going to teach you. I'm going to make it happen. But you're right. It's just having an unflinching kind of vision. And he knows my experiences with him was that it felt like when I and my friends, we used to make movies when we were in Dallas, just, making movies ourselves as kids. It felt like that same spirit. Of just, hey, we're all getting together to make a movie. And he knew just kind of exactly what he wanted. He's the kind of director that is kind of able to give you a line reading and go, no, it's try it like this. And his try it like this is exactly right and exactly how it should be. And yet he's so collaborative on his set, and you could just tell how much fun people are having. And it comes across in Desperado, even before I could ever dream of working with Robert Rodriguez. Just seeing the movie, it was just so fun, right? And that's what you come away with, whatever little nuggets. And there's all those things to it. But overall, it's just, what a blast of a movie. No pun intended, literally.
I love seeing actors and directors and artists of all kinds kind of hit things from extreme opposites of the spectrum. I think of Gerard Butler in Phantom of the Opera, and then he goes on and he's King Leonidas in 300. It's like, how different could those two roles be? George Miller is another that comes to mind. I mean, you have Babe and Happy Feet, and then Mad Max Fury Road, and it's like, wow, these visions came from the same guy. And it's awesome to see Robert Rodriguez have this kind of versatility with his directing, and when he's working with crews and actors, and the whole process of putting this stuff together. And he just seems to nail it every time. Like, everything that I've seen from him tonally, it's always telling the story that he wants to tell in the way that he wants to tell it, and it seems to just work for whatever audience he's trying to target. And I think that's awesome, and to have that kind of versatility is great. We talked about Quentin Tarantino earlier. I love Tarantino films, but when you go to a Tarantino movie, you have some resemblance of knowledge of what you're gonna get as far as Tarantino's style. So it's the next movie that Robert Rodriguez makes, when I go see it, I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you or predict ahead of time what this film is going to be like, just based on how different and versatile his library has been so far.
There's a really great interview with Rodriguez doing this kind of director's chair interviews with film directors, and he talks with George Miller, and I think it's on YouTube. It was originally on El Rey, but it's a really great conversation because he's saying the same thing. How do you go from, toe cutter to That'll Do Pig? I think that I would love to have seen kind of a Mad Max version of Babe, but that's a different conversation altogether. I think we should have a separate conversation about kind of multiverse theories of movies where the director just did the same style. But I think that's ultimately the joy of making art, right? You get to indulge your own whims, and you get to decide ultimately, if you're lucky enough, what you want to do. And sometimes you want to try a little something different, show a different side of you. And Danny Trejo is a perfect example. How intimidating, how terrifying he is in Desperado. Someone you would never want to mess with, let alone mouth off to or shoot. And then here he is playing like the kind-hearted, crafty Uncle Machete in Spy Kids, right? Couldn't be nicer, couldn't be more supportive. Mm-hmm. And then taking the same character name and playing a tough badass named Machete in the Machete movies. And so I think that's kind of the fun thing. Red 11 and We Can Be Heroes could not have been more dissimilar, just in style and tone, but also in scope. I mean, Red 11, it was just the crew was Robert and his son Racer, and that's it. That was the crew. And then a handful of us that were in the movie one location, no crew. That was my first experience working with Robert. And then, a couple months later, big set, big Netflix budget, giant crew. I was wondering if the experience was going to be any different. And it was just different in scope, but the spirit was still there. The spirit just kind of having fun. I mean, that's ultimately what it's about, right? End of the day.
That's so awesome. And fun fact for you guys, I just looked this up on IMDb. Steve Buscemi's character in this movie is actually Buscemi. That's his name. So
I didn't realize that. That's funny.
I don't think they ever call him by his name.
They don't, because I looked that up too. And one thing I know, and I don't know this for sure about that Buscemi part, but I know from working with Rodriguez is that he will often write a character for an actor. He for Red 11, for example, he auditioned all of us before the movie was completed, which we didn't know at the time, but we just auditioned. And then he sort of said, oh, that guy, that girl, that I like them. I'm going to kind of make a new character based on this one actor. So I imagine that was the case with Steve Buscemi. I mean, because then Steve Buscemi does one of the Spy Kids movies as well. So
yeah, that's really awesome to hear. And one of the things that I have been kind of getting into a little bit more over the last year or so has been Tejano music. We did a couple episodes on Selena last year, and she's quickly grown to be one of my most listened to artists. And Dan, you and I were texting about this. It wasn't. I'm gonna preface this statement. It wasn't the sexy stripper / vampire. It wasn't the sick school nurse from the faculty that made this happen. It was freaking Caroline from Desperado that put Salma Hayek in my top 5 celebrity crushes now. And there's a scene where she can where she's singing, she's playing the guitar, and I think that is one of my favorite sequences as well. She's playing the guitar, and you have all of this action going on around it, building to this climactic shootout. And I just have to say, I need a Salma Hayek Spanish album now. Just put her in a studio with the guitar. I need it. I didn't realize I needed it until this movie, but I realized I need a lot more things after this movie, and this is one of them.
Well, that's another element to this movie, and I think so many Rodriguez movies that gets overlooked. I remember when From Dusk Till Dawn came out, and there was, Tito and Tarantula. Tito, who was in the Plugs and kind of an old punk rocker, and then they made the band and the music such a huge part of From Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah.
Same as Desperado. The music is authentic. Rodriguez always has a guitar next to him on the set. In between takes, just kind of noodling around. I think it just helps him think or whatever. But I think, considers himself a musician as well. His band Chingon, they've scored some of his movies. And Los Lobos scored Desperado, which is a fantastic band,
I didn't know that.
So the music is so important, but there's so many elements that if you take them out, they're equally as important, right? And Desperado, but it's them putting them all together. So it's kind of seamless, fantastic music. You're right. I think often gets overlooked because all the action is kind of going on around you, but the music just sets that tone as well.
It definitely does, and this the entire tone of this movie is just so cool. And I feel like there's something about 90s action movies specifically that just hold a special place in my heart, and I feel like they're almost identifiable in a way, in just whether it's the over the top nature or just the styles of the time for the actors. But there's so much, and I noticed so many things in this movie that it does well that I recognize from future films. I mentioned John Wick earlier, and there are scenes, especially with the gunfighting and Danny Trejo's knife battle scene in the opening of John Wick 3. There's kind of a similar knife fight that goes on with throwing knives, and it's just it's cool to see some of this stuff and how it's reverberated through the years. And Brentley, you mentioned the scene in the bar when they're picking up the guns and shooting them, and they're all empty, and they do this several times, and it's just so similar to a few years later, The Matrix comes out, and in the fight scene between Agent Smith and Neo, and they're shooting each other, and then their guns are empty, and it's just I feel like it offered inspiration to other filmmakers, and you can kind of see the effects of this throughout. And of course, this film in itself took inspirations from older art as well. So it's just cool to see kind of over the decades how things are adapted and changed, and how you can see similarities but still enjoy these brand new stories with these really cool characters.
Yeah, I think of kind of art and movies as it's like, or anything entertainment, it's like a current, right? And so if you dip your toe in, it's always ongoing. You can be in touch with kind of your ancestors and your lineage in film history, and then the current continues onward to inspire the next generation. And he's so open to that. You can hear it in the way he talks with George Miller and these other directors, things like that. He really knows his history. And I think that when you feel connected to the past, whether it's in this case like, movie history or things that you inspire, I think it helps ground you, right? And this is about mental health too. I think it helps ground you in a history, so you don't feel as isolated. You feel like you're part of a continuum. I really feel that way working with him and being a part of the experience, and certainly seeing it. You're totally right. You can see elements of movies previous that he was inspired by, and then absolutely movies that have been inspired by him. And that's kind of a cool thing.
You mentioned mental health, and that's kind of like where I wanted to like direct the conversation. There's so many mental health themes throughout the course of Desperado, where it is kind of this like blind hatred that both of these characters, el-mariachi and Bucho, are on, that it really consumes them. And there's one scene in particular that it's going to sound kind of awkward the way that I viewed this scene, but stick with me. I promise I'm going somewhere with it. Bucho is like having sex with this woman, and she's just having this like really grand time, like she's enjoying it for what it is, and he's just kind of like lying there like almost bored, and she like tries to cuddle with him afterwards, and this is like 2/3 into the film, and so he's like so consumed with getting this mythed guitar guy that is el-mariachi, and it's consuming him to like the fact that where he can't even enjoy something as simple as intimacy. And it really kind of struck me as this allegory for the way that depression can really consume thoughts, and the way that it just kind of helps you, it just distracts you and makes you really kind of blind to everything else around you. And these characters, this is just one scene, but these characters are so blind to everything else around them, to where like there's another scene between Banderas and Buscemi where they're in a confessional, and Steve just doesn't want anything to do with el-mariachi anymore, because he's just kind of tired of being in this cycle of death, and you're kind of seeing like how his mental health is kind of like starting to affect others in a really negative and violent sense.
Yeah, and there's another scene that comes to mind where in the kind of about, when you're that myopic and you're all consumed with the fog of depression or the fog of rage or whatever is so, you're so narrow focused, there's collateral damage, right? And that's our friends, that's our loved ones. In this case of Desperado, that's the kid in the street, right? Who is unfortunately caught up in kind of the crossfire. I'll let you watch the movie and see what happens, but that, of course you would never intend to hurt a loved one with your own depression. Of course you would never intend to hurt a little kid with your own direct rage and revenge, fantasies that you're going after. But there is collateral damage when you are not aware. Anything that when you're that laser focused and you're that consumed, you don't see what's around you. It's hard to be present, right? And see who's around you that can get caught up in the crossfire, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, it's the realization of that your everyone has these like social bubbles around them, right? And the people that you love and you're with, from friends to family, and their mental health and how it affects you, and your mental health and how it affects them, and just realizing that, people are life is just this thing that you kind of go through. I was talking with a friend the other day who kind of takes care of her parents full time, and it's there's some health issues going on, and it's kind of difficult. And it's like, I understand how difficult this is, and at the same time, that's kind of how life goes. It's like we're gonna face challenges and difficulties, and it's you can get down about everything, or try to kind of face it positively and kind of move forward and push forward. And it's much easier to do that with a support system in place, but it is difficult always to kind of keep yourself steady and centered when there's so much going on, especially with the climate right now, with the middle of the pandemic and everything that's just going on. Mental health is definitely a key thing to pay attention to. And, that's why we turn to movies, and that's why Josh and I are such huge film fans, because it gives us an opportunity to not only escape from our own lives for a little bit, but to really, by looking at these different characters, we can start to kind of see parts of ourselves in them and learn from them too. And like, that's one of the reasons why this is such an awesome industry, and why it'll continue. Like, these stories are going to continue to be told for as long as there are humans to tell stories. And
you're right, and it's wonderful. And it often, another allegory is that we think that we're doing others a favor by pushing them away, because we don't want them to be affected by our poison, or our whatever it is. And if your depression is so bad, and your focus is so bad, or your rage is so bad that you even turn Salema-Hayek away, it's like let people in to help share the load, in a sense, because ultimately you're better together. And I think that's kind of, go off in the sunset. But you do have a partner. I think it was el-mariachi is someone who's been so isolated as a character, especially when his, in el-mariachi, where his loved one has been killed by a person he's directing his revenge toward. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty much just blind rage, revenge towards the person that wronged him, and everyone else kind of be damned. And it's really easy to kind of get in the fog of our own rage, our own depression, our own, whatever it is, and push others outside, but doing so because I don't want to see you get hurt. I'm just going to hurt you. I don't want to see you get hurt. It's kind of BS, right? I've said that before. And you're pushing people away who can help share the load, and help you go kill Bucho. I mean, so ultimately, that's what we're all trying. We all have our own inner Buchos to slay, and our own white suited ego that we have, which is, that's our brother. It's that your own darkness, your own dark self, your own dark thoughts. It's part of you, right? I can speak for myself, but I've certainly had arguments where you're your own worst enemy, right? Cutting yourself down, talking to yourself in ways that you would never let anyone else talk to you, or let alone talk to a friend. And so, that voice in your head is your brother, is your sister. It's part of you as well, and you have to kind of reconcile that. So anyway, I love that. I love the theme of your show, and
thank you.
Yeah, for sure. It's really helpful. It's helpful to a lot of people. Ultimately, just talking about it and putting it out in the open.
I think
blowing stuff up along the way.
Yeah, and I think too, for the reason that we tend to push people away, like what you were talking about, Brentley, is because it boils down to one of two things. It's either we can't talk about mental health because society says that as men, like, we have to be strong and we have to be stoic, and we have to be the providers and stuff like that. And we're starting to kind of break those stereotypes around men, or the second one being these people will never understand, and they'll never understand what I'm going through, and I think that we discredit people a lot of times, where you might have this like really, really terrible situation that you're finding yourself in, but lo and behold, you're going to, I think, surprise yourself and the people around you when you discover that they actually probably do understand what you're going through, maybe more than you know. Maybe they don't know the degree, but we've all gone through sadness, we've all gone through tough times, and a large portion of that stuff comes from being vulnerable, but also at the same time, like, life is just full of like ups and downs, and it's how we respond to those ups and downs that I think really help us better understand how to communicate and how to talk to people, and kind of get out of that bubble like you were talking about, Dan, and really start to be vulnerable and to communicate those things. And it takes a while for el-mariachi to kind of convey that to Caroline, and that's why the ending to this movie feels so fitting for both of their journeys, because they've both suffered loss and they've both suffered grief and had those casualties and those collateral damage. And I think that he's looking for a better way, like a restart almost. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I love is the very end of the movie where, driving off in the sunset, put my dark past behind me, we're going to go have this wonderful life. He puts his guns on the side of the road. I'm done with this part of me, drives off, and then goes, nah, and goes and picks it up. It's a really funny moment, very funny, but also there are people out there, and Caroline is the example, and salema-hayek is that, who will take you as you are, who will be there for you, be your partner, hold you accountable, but also accept those dark parts of us, right? Accept our depression, accept anxiety, insert trauma here. And you don't have to be a different person to have a partner in your life that will see you for your full self, right? And I think that's kind of a nice little bit about the ending as well. They're still going off in the sunset. He's just going to go grab his guns because there's trouble coming up, man.
Literally, my thought at that scene, I was like, what if a child comes by and picks up that case full of guns? What are you doing? So I was happy that he picked those up and took them with him. But yeah, I think we, just as people, as a species, we tend to be our own worst critics. And that can both be demoralizing at times, but I try to flip it and actually make it a little bit more optimistic, because no matter what I think about myself, I know that is the most negative version of those thoughts that are out there, most likely. And so it's like, okay, if I feel this way about myself, I just know that it's unlikely that other people do, and that's a good thing. I've been trying to work out and eat better during quarantine. Brentley, you look like a very handsome, fit individual, so definitely looking at you, there's some goals and motivation there. But it's like, you look at yourself in the mirror and you see flaws, right? And so, but what I'm seeing, it's like, okay, I'm being so critical. It's unlikely that if I have a friend or a loved one look at me, they're going to say, oh, here's everything I don't like about you, or you don't look attractive, or you don't look fit. It's I'm internalizing my own criticisms and then kind of acknowledging, okay, this is how I feel, but it's unlikely other people are going to feel this way. And that's a good thing. And I'm trying a mental health experiment of treating myself like how I would treat my best friend in the same situation. And if I'm being critical of myself, I think, okay, would I be critical of my friend or my fiance or someone that I really care about? Or would I be understanding? Would I be loving? And would I be offering support? And I try to turn that around and do it for myself. And it's not always easy, but it's just it's a fun thought experiment that makes me a little less harsh on myself than I would otherwise be.
I'll tie it back into Desperado as well, is that, how often have we had someone, or usually ourselves, right, be that Buscemi character for ourselves and go out there and spread the myth of ourselves that, or create an image that we want others to see, a version of ourselves, right, which is all one thing, right? El Mariachi is all badass. He's all shadows. He's all terrifying. He is terror himself, right? He is supernaturally terrifying. And that's not true of any one of us. We're not all one thing. Even if we're optimistic, we're not always up. We're not all one thing. But I have worked really hard in the past to try to create a myth about myself out there with people. And lo and behold, that always comes crashing down, like 10 times out of 10. Yeah. And so as it does in El Mariachi, right? Even though you're the most terrifying, the biggest Mexican you'd ever seen in the movie, you're still going to be the guy who comes up empty with your clips and comes up shooting, but your gun is empty at times. That's still you too. The reality is really what we have. And it's funny because that's the simplest step, right? The shortest distance is the reality of you, not the myth you are. And so that's one of the things that I took from Desperado as well, kind of in perpetrating the myth about ourselves, when really the reality is just as strong.
It's always hard too to keep those myths up, where especially the person that you're having spread this myth about you, and that's Buscemi's journey throughout the course of this. For as short-lived as it is, like, he doesn't want to do this anymore. Like, it's starting to take its toll on him, and like, he authentically cares about El Mariachi, and he is kind of seeing that, like, hey, like, you're on this like really bad path. Like, you're setting yourself up for failure. Like, just walk away. And, Banderas, being clouded by that, eventually is like, no. And it comes back to that collateral damage we were talking about earlier, where Buscemi actually ends up dying at the hands of Trejo. And, how many of us have kind of gone through that, where we, nowadays with social media, you don't even need to have someone else. Like, you can create your own myth and perpetrate and, put yourself out in the world for the way that you want to be seen. And, you want to show the best version of yourself. And I remember reading a book years ago that talked about that. And it struck me really profoundly, because I looked at my own social media and I was like, all right, what am I putting out here? It's like all positive things. And now my social media is nothing but movies. Because, they're my mental health escape. Like, that's the treatment, and my therapy almost is just escaping and like diving into these characters and setting up parameters as well.
And social media it's a perfect opportunity for anyone to showcase the image that you want to be showcased, right? Which is either like, I'm promoting stuff all the time, I'm in stuff all the time, I'm a successful actor, I'm a mom, I'm an influencer, I'm a food blogger, whatever it is. That's like what you are supposedly 100% of the time, right? And you're able to cultivate that kind of image of yourself, which 10 times out of 10 is going to clash with the reality of, sometimes we are perfect, sometimes we are flawed. We're all those things in one. And I think that El Mariachi is a really interesting character study of someone who is all those things, right? Who is flawed, who is insecure and vulnerable, and yet has to kind of carry that image. And if you look at it from a trilogy perspective, he didn't start off all badass. He didn't start off. He just was a guy. He was a mariachi player, you know what I mean, at the beginning. And he had to sort of take on this extra burden and become this kind of supernatural person to achieve his goals of revenge.
I love that band coming together at the end, though, and just the versatility of the guitar cases. And one's a rocket launcher, and one's a machine gun. Like it's so brilliant.
Launcher. It's just, and this is where I want to stop and say, all hail the prop department, right?
Oh yeah.
There were guys working with Rodriguez, and there's a lot of them, men and women, who have been working with him since The Faculty, when he first made this big budget movie in Austin. And so a lot of the crew has been around him. And so there is such a like seamlessness of like, hey, it would be cool if, and then you almost see the like on it and creating the prop out of nothing, creating the rocket launcher guitar case, creating the machine gun guitar case. And it's like, how do you top a Gatling gun machine gun guitar case? I don't know, shoot a rocket out of it. It was the coolest thing I had ever seen, and you could just feel the audience. I saw it in the theaters when I was just a kid going, whoa! It's exhilarating, right? To see someone to bend down and shoot a rocket launcher out of their guitar at my enemies. It's like, what's that Care Bears? They used to like sliz open their stomachs and shoot out rainbows at their enemies. The Care Bear stare. It was similar. I think Rodriguez should make a Care Bears movie, but make it ultra violent.
Yes.
That would be phenomenal. I would watch that. You've got leading man Antonio-Banderas, which just he kicks so much ass in this movie, yes. And I don't follow his career super slowly. Like I've seen Mask of Zorro because I feel like everybody did in the 90s, and he was of course Puss in Boots in the Shrek films. Like he's got some really really good roles under his belt. Did you guys know that one role that he had wanted was to be the Phantom of the Opera when that film was being made? And there's actually a clip on YouTube you can find of him performing the lead song Phantom of the Opera to Andrew Lloyd Webber. I believe it was his birthday celebration. It was a real huge event. But there is a version of Antonio-Banderas, and I mean he's good. Like the guy can sing. And so, obviously they went with Gerard Butler for the film, but hearing him sing, like I would love more of that from him, because like the talent is there and the versatility is there, and that's really cool to see.
Well, they got him in Evita. He did his Weber eventually.
Oh yeah.
He was singing in that. It's interesting to think about who else could have been in what parts. I just read when I was kind of getting ready for this podcast recording that I didn't know that Raul Julia, fantastic actor, was originally cast to be Bucho. That was the head bad guy, but he passed away, unfortunately, before filming started, and so they cast it. Who's and the tremendous actor that plays him in the movie. But that's the great thing about movies is what could have been and who could have been. We could have had Back to the Future with Eric Stoltz and, other famous recastings, but that's a whole different podcast episode.
Well, it's funny, and Brentley, being in the industry, I'm sure you're familiar and you've seen some of this, but it's, when you make those connections and you meet people and one door kind of opens another and leads to another, and you get these good opportunities. Something that I've been listening to the Scrubs rewatch podcast a lot, and something they've mentioned is that you always hear about people being like, oh, I worked with this guy and it was a great relationship, and then I got put on their next movie or on their next show, and that's kind of how that worked. And they said, well, the opposite happens too. If you come on a set and you're just an asshole and you're miserable to work with, there could be an opportunity later where someone says, oh, what about this? And someone in the room will say, no, we don't want to hire that person. Let's not do that.
Oh, good for you. I learned that from doing theater as a kid. You be cool to everybody. First of all, just be cool to everybody.
Yeah.
Why would you mess around with anyone that's trying to light you, make you sound good? And you really do feel that on the two Rodriguez sets that I've been on, is that there is so much mutual respect from the top on down and vice versa, that everyone is together making this really fun thing. It really does feel like you're at your friend's house making a movie as a kid, on a big clunky video camera. All you have is what you can bring to the spirit of things, and it's so joyous. And yes, you're totally right. You never know which key grip you're going to yell at or belittle or not look it at in the eye, because you're only going to look at your fellow actors or something stupid. Who's going to be the next big director? And that's not saying be nice to everyone because they might do something for you later, but it's the it's respect everyone at their positions. How important is that rocket launcher guitar? Well, that's a prop guy that had to make it, or woman, right? That is someone whose job it was to make that, and who knocked it out of the park, right? There's so many people that have to come together to make one cohesive movie.
Yeah.
Why would you detract from that? So I've never understood that, and really, like, I met so many people who are way more successful and famous than me, way, way more successful, and are so cool and so nice and so easy to work with in my life that I've met, and people that were, you know, day players who were total assholes. And like, why would you choose to be that way? I've never understood it. And you're totally right. Why would you? If you're even going to do it for purely selfish reasons, be cool to everybody, you know? Just makes things smoother, but that usually says more about them than anybody else, right?
Be excellent
insecurity,
to one another.
Vulnerability. But, you know, it's just play.
I'm so happy you mentioned things like the prop team and all the work that goes into making these movies. One of my favorite things, and I'm a huge video game fan too, and I do the same thing. When the credits roll, and just looking at the sheer number of people who came together to work to make this thing happen, it's so awe-inspiring. My fiance has a degree in costume design, and she studied theater, and she has been so interested in television and film for a long time, and it's helped me to look at things like costume design in movies, something that I wouldn't necessarily pay as close attention to. But, you know, especially superhero films particularly, I mean, people always talk about the outfits, but when you look at period pieces, when you look at cultural pieces, and there's so much that goes into there. Lord of the Rings, I think, is a prime example of just the different, you know, amazing costuming, and how each costume was representative of that character's past and their culture. And there's just so much cool stuff that goes in that might be on screen for just a few seconds, but like someone took time to make and think about that. And it's just so impressive, and it's one of the reasons why I love this medium so much.
I really want Antonio-Banderas' scorpion jacket from this movie.
Oh, it exists. It's so cool.
I know. I want it.
Everything is a troublemaker. I'm serious. Like, as a movie nerd, everything is there. All the props, and it's all right there. And your point, you know, my wife is in production. She's a production manager, works at Austin City Limits and, you know, other events. And she has always looked at the credits, right? Because she wants to see who does all the production. And we're kind of desensitized now, and especially it's kind of the Netflix rule where they want you to start watching the next thing. So they'll let you watch the credits. It's actually more difficult to sit and go, no, I don't want to continue on to the next episode. I want to see who did the props in The Mandalorian or whatever. So my wife has kind of schooled me to, like, sit your ADD ass down, and we're going to watch the credits because those people are outstanding, right? The J.J. Dashnaw, who did all the stunts for We Can Be Heroes and a lot of Rodriguez movies, those guys and women are working on the crew. They show up before you. They stay later. They're on their feet. It's 16, 18-hour days. And their job, if done right, looks like they didn't do anything at all. It's just supposed to look seamless. So all hail the production crew. I think it's an important thing. We're kind of in a not watching the credits, you know, point in our media consumption. And I think it's a good reminder that it's not just one person. It's a lot of people who come together to make it, and learn their names, learn their names.
Yeah. And I think Marvel films especially have conditioned us to stay through the credits now, just in case there's that one more thing. And it's gotten, and I like doing it anyways, but there's always that, like, oh, what if there is? I think it was like 1917. We were in the theater watching that film, and the credits rolled, and I was like, oh, like, maybe there'll be an after credits sequence. Wait, no, it's not that kind of movie.
1917.
But I was like, oh, what if they set up the sequel for 1917? Like, I can't miss that if that happens.
I would like do an after credit sequence and like tie it into some like Mac and Me or just some obscure movie that like, or just show it in one theater. That's where my brain goes. But yeah, it's good to know the crew. The crew makes it happen. All hail the production teams, and they've really been screwed in the COVID world. They've really hurt the production teams and people in events and production. So they're really struggling right now. Their whole industry has been decimated. So I'm excited to see it come back. But that's really been the case of a lot of projects that I've worked on. I did Friday Night Lights, the TV show, in shot in Texas. That whole crew had been together since the movie. And so crews stick together. And yes, they all talk. So, hey, actors out there, you're going to be rude to the person doing your hair or getting your lav mic on. Everyone talks. And, you know, they're going to work more than you. They're going to work consistently. And so don't be an asshole. Do yourself a favor. Just be nice. It's way easier. Way easier. And ultimately way more fun.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, at the end of the day, like, you guys are all working together for, like, 6 months. You know, depending on, like, how big of a scope of a project it is, you guys could be working together for as little as, like, 3 weeks to as little as, like, almost, like, 9 months, depending on, you know, what you're... So, I love the one of the mantras that I've always tried to live by comes back from film, and it's the Bill and Ted, you know, be excellent to one another. Like,
party on, dudes.
Yeah, it's so simple, but you know, I think we have a tendency to kind of overcomplicate it. I mean, at the end, like, you know, you need that community, and to tie it back into Desperado, there's that scene between Banderas and Buscemi where you know, Buscemi's basically like, you know, I'm done. I'm out. Like, these days are of me, you know, creating your myths, and they're all over. And, you know, Banderas says, I should be able to count on you. And, you know, if you're constantly being rude and ignorant to the people around you, like, how are you going to be expecting to, you know, really build and create a lasting community? Because what you do today affects your tomorrow.
Right off into the sunset. Just don't forget to grab your guns. You never know. Grab your tools.
Well, I think that's going to do it for us on this episode of Victims and Villains. I just have to say, I really enjoyed this movie. As the credits rolled on this, I went out and ordered myself the sequel, Once Upon a Time in Mexico. We'll report back. But you guys can stream Robert Rodriguez and Brently-Heilbron's movie, We Can Be Heroes, right now on Netflix. Where can people find you online, though?
You can find me on Twitter at Brently. Don't worry about spelling my last name. Those links will take you everywhere else. But once again, guys, it was a real pleasure. I could talk about movies all day, and tying it into the really good work that you're doing and continuing the conversation about mental health awareness is really, really important, and it can only improve things. And so I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, man. Like, for seriously, I wasn't sure intentionally how, like, bringing you on was going to go when we did the interview, and I was like, okay, you know, maybe. You never know with like, people that are, like, quote, in the industry, how they're going to be. And I just remember coming off of the first interview we did with you guys, which we'll provide a link for in the descriptions below. I was like, man, I really want to, like, have this guy on, like, a larger scale podcast, and we talked about doing a Robert Rodriguez movie, so just kind of felt like a perfect fit.
Oh yeah, it really feels like, I just remember so clearly being the kid that saw Desperado and was like, this is the coolest movie I'd ever seen. I just didn't have words to describe it. And then, you know, years later being on that set, it really does feel like it comes full circle. You still feel like that kid. And I imagine that Rodriguez still feels like that kid who got to make movies with his family. And, you know, he just got more tools to do it. So just keep that spirit up. And it's a pretty wonderful thing to share.
Yeah, you guys can also check out Brently's band, Fragile Rock. It's an emo-puppet band / comedy act. Their album is really interesting to listen to, so I just recommend checking out that as well. Dan, where can people find you online, though?
You can find me over at Twitter. I'm at drock6499. A lot of video game stuff shared there, and some political stuff. So if you're not up for that, don't follow me, because that's what you're going to get over there. But man, this was so much fun. Desperado was such an excellent movie. Brentley, thank you for coming on, and hats off to you, man. I know acting is a very challenging profession, and especially right now with the pandemic, things are definitely not easy. But to have that perseverance and kind of go from those different creative roles and kind of tell those stories, it definitely takes a toll, and it's just you got to be in it just day in and day out. So that's, good luck with everything that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing, more of your work in the future for sure.
Rock and roll.
You guys can follow me on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, and follow my 2021 film journey over there. It's bleeding out into our Instagram as well. You guys can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Letterboxd. Or go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find all of our past episodes, spin-off podcasts, social media, and most importantly, our mental health resource library, the real reason we create this. We are so proud to be a podcast that endorses both pop culture and uses it to talk about mental health as well. We're going to be jumping back into the world of horror on our next episode. We're going to be covering Jennifer's Body, the cult classic with Shook director Jen Harrington. Super excited about that, but have a good night, guys, and go listen to some mariachi music.